Have you ever really stopped to wonder what actually separates the absolute star performers in any given field from the folks who are just, well, average? For a really long time, we've been sold this myth, right? We've been told that academic excellence, perfect grades, a super fancy business school degree, or just unmatched technical expertise, that those are the guaranteed tickets to success. But what if I told you the data says something completely different? What if there's this secret differentiator, a totally different set of skills that actually dictates who rises to the top and, more importantly, stays there?
Well, let's dive right into this summary explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the truly groundbreaking insights from Daniel Goleman's research on working with emotional intelligence. We're basically going to look at the ultimate game changer for star performance in the modern workplace. It's this incredibly fascinating look into why the smartest people in the room aren't always the most successful, and how you can actually develop the exact skills that do matter.
So here's our quick roadmap for the explainer today. 1. The new yardstick. 2. The brain. 3. The framework. 4. High group IQ. And finally, number 5, learning EI. Let's get into it.
Starting with Section 1, the new yardstick, redefining success.
So look, for a really long time, traditional metrics, your grades, your degrees, years of experience, technical know-how, those were the gold standard. But today, they're essentially just a baseline. They're literally just the minimum requirement to get your foot in the door. The new yardstick, the one that really counts, focuses heavily on soft skills. We're talking initiative, empathy, adaptability, and how well we actually handle ourselves and each other. In an era where this idea of a static, lifelong job is rapidly being replaced by the need for portable skills, these emotional competencies are exactly what predict who gets hired, who gets promoted, and who stays highly marketable moving forward.
Now get this number, 90%. When researchers looked at hundreds of top executives across 15 global companies, and we're talking giants here, like IBM and PepsiCo, they found something absolutely stunning. For top leadership positions, close to 90% of their success was attributable to emotional intelligence. Not cognitive ability, not technical superiority, emotional intelligence. Aside from the ability to recognize big-picture patterns, pure, raw intellect played almost zero role in separating the mediocre leaders from the absolute rock stars. Crazy, right?
To really understand why this is, let's look at a pretty striking story from the research. There was this executive, and he was hired to run a $65 million family business. Now, on paper, his cognitive capacity was completely off the charts. He was what they call a level 6 thinker, smart enough to run a massive global corporation. But he failed terribly. He'd actually been fired from his previous job too. Why? Because he just couldn't handle confronting underperforming employees. When asked about it, his face would get all flushed, he'd wave his hands around, get super agitated, and suddenly his incredible ability to reason would just absolutely plummet. It perfectly proves the old adage, out-of-control emotions can make smart people stupid. You can have all the intellectual horsepower in the world, but if you lack emotional competence, you are never going to reach your full potential. Which brings us to Section 2, the brain, the inner rudder. So to really get this, we need to talk about the amygdala. This is an ancient, tiny, almond-shaped structure deep inside your brain. Long before we humans ever developed the neocortex for rational thought, the amygdala was busy storing every single emotional reaction we've ever had to an experience. It basically acts as this incredible, massive repository of life's wisdom. You know when you get a gut feeling? That somatic, physical response that guides you to either trust someone completely or warns you to, say, dump a bad stock? That is literally your amygdala sending you a message. Ignoring these deeply evolved signals, that basically means ignoring your own internal reservoir of judgment.
But there's a flip side to this ancient wiring, especially when we're under pressure. The prefrontal lobes of your brain, right behind your forehead, that's your executive center. They hold your working memory, which is absolutely vital for complex thought, planning, learning, the whole shebang. But when you experience a crisis or super high stress, your brain actually shifts into a primal survival mode. It literally steals resources away from your working memory and shunts them to other areas just to keep your senses hyper-alert. The brain falls back on simple, familiar routines and completely throws creative insight out the window. So that's the actual neuroscience behind why panic or rage makes it physically impossible to think clearly on the job.
Moving right along to Section 3, the framework, mind and heart. Goleman takes about 25 different emotional competencies and divides them up into two main categories. The first is personal competence, and this is entirely about how we manage ourselves. So we're looking at things like self-awareness, self-regulation, and internal motivation.
The second category is social competence, which is outward-facing. It's all about how we handle relationships through empathy and social skills. And the key takeaway here? You absolutely need both if you want to be a true star performer.
Let's dive a little deeper into the personal side, specifically motivation. See, star performers are driven by something much deeper than just an end-of-the-year bonus. They frequently operate in this state of flow. And flow happens when your skills are so fully engaged by a challenging project that you literally lose track of time. The work itself becomes a delight. Competencies like achievement drive, commitment, initiative, and optimism, they're all fueled by that internal exhilaration of just doing great work. It's not just about chasing external carrots. Now, on the external, social side, your foundational skill is empathy. You can think of empathy as basically your social radar. Most people aren't going to explicitly tell you exactly how they're feeling, right? They communicate it through their tone of voice or microexpressions, body language. If you lack this radar, you become emotionally tone-deaf, and that leads to social awkwardness and this sort of mechanical bluntness that can completely destroy workplace rapport. But when you master competencies like truly understanding others and reading political currents, you can just effortlessly pilot through the emotional undercurrents of any organization.
All right, Section 4, High Group IQ, the emotionally intelligent organization.
So when you bring all this together on a team, you get something called Group IQ. And let me tell you, this is a massive competitive advantage. When a team is functioning at its absolute best, the results aren't just additive, they are multiplicative. The skills of one person catalyze the talents of someone else, producing results far beyond what any single genius could ever achieve alone. But here is the kicker. A massive study of 60 different work teams found that the single most important dimension for team effectiveness was the human element, the collaborative chemistry and exactly how members interacted with each other. That is what determined the Group IQ.
Let's anchor this with a very real, very high-stakes example. At Petro-Canada, which is a major oil and gas company, one of their gas plant divisions was experiencing this awful wave of severe, sometimes even fatal accidents. So they brought in a consultant, and what did they find? They discovered that the intensely macho culture meant crews literally never checked in on each other's feelings. If someone came in totally distracted by a sick kid or a bad argument at home, no one asked if they were sharp enough to work that day. But once the company instituted a culture where it was actually okay to emotionally check in and say, hey, I really don't think you should be on the heavy equipment today, their safety record dramatically improved. Ignoring emotions literally had a human cost.
Which leads us to our final part. Section 5, Learning EI, a new model. So to fix the billion-dollar mistake of ineffective soft skills training, a consortium of researchers actually identified the best practices for true behavioral change, because emotional intelligence absolutely can be learned. But it's definitely not going to happen in a single boring afternoon seminar. It requires assessing the specific needs of the job, making sure the individual is actually ready and motivated to change, and most importantly, making that change self-directed. Habits change slowly, right? It requires sustained practice over months, fully expecting relapses, and making sure you have strong mentoring and support systems in place.
And when organizations actually get this right, the results are totally staggering. The Saratoga Institute analyzed top-performing companies across 20 different industries, and these companies were selected purely for their profitability, volume, and cycle times. So what did these highly profitable organizations all have in common? Open communication, collaboration, and a real balance between the human and financial sides. It is such a fascinating parallel. The organizational practices of highly profitable companies perfectly mirror the emotional competencies of star individuals. Plain and simple, an emotionally intelligent organization performs better.
So I want to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up this summary explainer. Take a really hard look at your own workplace ecology right now. Is your team operating with a high group IQ, or is brilliant talent being stifled by emotional incompetence? Remember, at the end of the day, business is done with people. Ignoring the human ingredient isn't just bad for morale, it is a guaranteed path to mediocrity. So the question is, are you ready to pick up the new yardstick?